Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. On June the 14th, the Chinese government released a report saying that major targets and tasks set by the National Human Rights Action Plan of 2012 to 2015 had been fulfilled as scheduled by the end of 2015. Although China has made great effort to improve human rights protection, some Western countries never cease to criticize its record. How should we of human rights in China? What challenges face the country for the future? And what are the reasons behind the controversies over human rights between China and certain Western countries? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined by Professor Liu Huawen, Executive Director of the CAS Center for Human, and Professor Zhang Wei from China University of Political Science and Law. Welcome to our discussion here, gentlemen. Many people are wondering aloud why the Chinese government really report about the National Human Rights Action Plan. What's the purpose? Whether it's effective to promote the understanding between China and those who are very skeptical about the human rights record in this country. I'd like to have your why.
Yes, human rights are the dream of peoples around the world. So China, we think the human rights is the core, one of the core goals of our development. So to promote human rights, we have different approaches, different measures. We could make new laws, policies to promote human rights, and national Human Rights Action Plan is kind of a policy document, but it's a specific document, a policy for human rights. We know that all the work of the government is relevant to human rights, but with the action plan of human rights, the government should work for, not just about that, they should directly for human rights. We see human rights action plan is a typical step to promote the mainstreaming of human rights in a country.
What do you mean by mainstreaming human rights?
Yeah, that means when we make a new law, make policies, and when we enforce the laws and policies, we should consider human rights. We should consider the impact upon human rights. So always we bear in our mind human rights.
Now, Professor Zhang, what's your definition about human rights? Do we have a universal definition, or do you think different cultures are entitled to different understanding about what the issue actually means for its own government and peoples?
Yes, we do have a very clear definition for human rights. It's at least it's legally protected human rights, which are established by international human rights treaties and also by every domestic law. We call it legally binding rights because they can be protected through law.
But what are the rights?
There are many. For example, civil political rights, economic, social, cultural rights. In terms of civil political rights, they are normally legal binding with an immediate state obligation to respect and ensure. For example, freedom of speech, freedom of for example, the certain measures for the guarantee of a fair trial. And also we also have economic, social, cultural rights, which will require the states to take steps to fulfill these human rights with their available economic resources. That means that it is not immediate legal obligation for the state to fulfill these rights at one day. It takes time.
It takes time, indeed. Yeah. But Professor Zhang and you, why doesn't China have a similar law which is called Rights Bill? So far, China has signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and UN Charter. But why so many in our country, China here, are still so sensitive to the mere mention of human rights at this stage of our social and economic development? Now, China decided to open itself up and decided to integrate itself with the rest of the world almost, 4 decades ago with the end of the Cultural Revolution. Why? I mean, I have many questions as to why the Chinese are so sensitive about this issue of human rights. I have this feeling. Forgive me for having this feeling.
If we review our practices in 1991, Chinese government issued the first white paper on human rights. That's the first time, or that means Chinese government began to talk about human rights formally. We also used the banner of human rights. So from 1991 to now, not a long time. Still now, as you said, some people think it's a sensitive thing. But actually, gradually, I see human rights, the term, is normalized. In 2004, we input the clause "State respects human rights" into our constitution. So not a long time ago.
Well, I'm very happy that the issue of human rights is guaranteed constitutionally in this country, at least in theory. Now, you mentioned that it's in 1991 that the first human rights report from our government was released. The release of this white paper happened to coincide with the end of the Cold War. Now, the Cold War was brought to an end with the falling of the Berlin Wall and the disintegration of the Soviet Union. Was this release intended to ease, some public concerns at home? Because when you review the impact of the end of the Cold War, everybody, particularly the well-educated people who follow academic discussions in the United States. Professor Francisco Fukuyama is the author of The Last Man and the End of History. Dr. one of the greatest thinkers in the United States, and Francisco Fukuyama both argued that communism failed, democracy prevailed. So when we look at the historical context, maybe a lot of relevance could be delivered in our discussion about what it means to have a proper understanding about human rights. So Professor Deng, I wonder if you can properly and quickly understand what I mean here in raising this question.
I think there are several reasons for this misunderstanding of human rights in Chinese history. One is that political ideology, the conflicts between the West and the East. Both sides were holding very strongly their banners during that period of time. And second, I think also because China experienced a very difficult life in beginning of opening up period, especially with the trade issue with U.S. U.S. was using human rights as a political weapon to attack Chinese government at that time by putting sanctions on China if they
after the tragedy in 1989, I believe. Or just
it was
even
used
before
as
that.
even before.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was stopped during Clinton's administration in
Right, to separate the
1993.
human rights from the MFN, mostly favored trading nation status.
Yes, so that's the second reason. The third reason is that human rights are problems. Because every time you see human rights news, there are problems. So people are afraid of problems. When there are human rights problems, some people should be responsible for those problems.
You mean in the process of execution?
For example, if there's a mass accusation of environmental problems, which happened in several cities in China in the past, people were not happy with certain industrial projects. They are afraid that those would affect their environmental rights. So they went on the street and they protested and they wanted to get rid of those projects. There are some issues involving, for example, there was a killing by the police in Guizhou some years ago, right? And there were mass demonstration on the street, Wunan. So all these kind of things, they closed a major human rights issue in a society. In the end, someone should be responsible. So for many government officials, they were afraid of problems, because if they were not able to handle those problems correctly or in an efficient manner, they would be responsible. Someone should be held responsible for that.
Up to 100 million have become the middle income members of the Chinese society. We might be a little bit careful about the use of a middle class
Yes.
in a unique political system. It means, at least from the Western perspective, that this large group of the society may have the legitimate right to demand more social justice to be executed, right? And therefore, to safeguard one's rights that would of course be protected by the Constitution in theory. Does it go wrong as a middle-income family, well-educated, who has developed a clear and sharp awareness about the safeguarding one's own rights? And this right, of course, is protected by the Constitution. Is it wrong? Of course it's not wrong. I'm asking. But then Professor Zhang said a couple of minutes earlier, for many local government officials, the protection of human rights or the execution of it could be a problem for them. What should be done to let those government officials realize, look, this is a universal concern. I mean, unless you can do something to clarify the confusion, the image of China, this country really wants to set up a good image to rebuild its soft power. But then the image of the country would be very poor, right? What do you think of this logic?
Yeah, I say actually human rights is not always in conflict with the authority, not also involving confrontation between individuals and the government. I see in any society there is kind of logics about justice. If you see justice every day, you see and you see the nature, you feel comfortable. But if you feel it's not just, then you will be upset. Then something will be wrong. So if we protect individual rights, then the families, the people around the given individuals will be happy. Then the society will be healthy, and then the social stability could be maintained very well. And then the officials, the governmental officials, they could be easy. So in the long run, actually, human rights are not just for individuals; it's also for the authority. So we see human rights very close to helpful for good governance. And yeah.
About interpretations on human rights, let me go back to what late founding father of Singapore, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, said in his book on China and in his talks with many Western leaders. He said, famously, he believed that most in China would feel comfortable with having a very strong central government. Now, he said so, I believe, in the context of Chinese culture, which says, collective legitimacy, collective rights would always be higher and more important than individual liberty. The West would find it very difficult to accept this. They say individual liberty is non-negotiable, right? It's absolutely the most important thing in one's spiritual world. But in China, we say, hey, we have to work together to guarantee the well-being of the whole society before talking smart about your own individual rights. Now, what do you think of, I'm not getting philosophical, but we have to address the cultural differences here.
I do not think it's a cultural clash. I mean, every government has its own ways to improve its economic, social development. In this perspective, you realize that if you look at Chinese government behavior, you realize that over the past 20 years, Chinese development, social development, economic development has been based on, actually, as Professor Liu Huawen mentioned, that human rights-based approach. And he also called that mainstreaming in Chinese development, either economic, social, or you name it, every perspective of Chinese development. So this value of human rights is upheld by the whole society as a whole. In the West, I think we feel sometimes probably difficult to understand why China is always singled out by Western media. heavily criticized by Western media. In my opinion, it's not a very bad thing for China, because if they have a lot of international criticism on Chinese human rights behavior, or it is actually good for China to improve better and better.
Are you saying that China, which has become the second biggest economy in the world, should be more confident about being criticized by the international society? Well, we'll come back to examine these and other issues. You are watching Dialogue with Mr. Liu Huawen, Executive Director, Center for Human Rights Studies, and Professor Zhang Wei from the China University of Political Science and Law. Please stay with us. Welcome back. I've been doing my homework, gentlemen, about how the West looks at the Chinese human rights record. Now, one of the articles that impressed me most was some government officials in the United States admitted privately, not privately actually, at the congressional hearing about China's human rights. They said the progress had indeed been made in this country. Let's come back to China. Why so many of us refuse to work very hard to promote the Chinese voice, which has been so weak on international occasions, to promote the transparency, to clearly articulate the Chinese understanding about human rights? Why do you think the voice from China is so weak?
I see for a long time, even now, I see internationally the developing country like China doesn't enjoy see big voices for media or other planner. So not easy actually for people around the world, countries around the world, to know China very much. Not only developed country like US, but actually I met some persons from Africa or Latin America countries. They know very little about China, and so today.
But we have set up the Confucius institutions there in Africa. We, I believe, must have done a lot to promote mutual understanding. Human rights might be an integral part of what we say to them, right?
I see there are so many channels, means for people to know each other. So not just one institution or one channel. So people with people, and there are so many channels to know each other.
Mr. Zhang, you may have your own understanding, which might be kind of an uneasy truth. Let me know why many Chinese refuse to get involved in the process of telling the truth and get the message delivered.
I think the international media has different way of transforming information to its audience. If you read BBC, you read CNN, you realize every time it's anything about, most of the time, anything about China, it's all bad news. So it is all you see watch some documentaries and always telling stories about very sad individual stories. So they left people, or leave people a very deep impression of China. A very oppressive country or oppressive regime in some people's eyes, like because it's a communist regime. So it's an all black and white situation for many people.
But honestly, from your years of research as serious scholars, do you believe this government is a dictatorship, is a totalitarian regime, a regime that has zero tolerance for one's public speech, I mean, free discussions? Because it seems to me that from the books I've read, written by the West, they either have a Western democracy or Stalinist regime. There's nothing in between. We have a strong feeling that some friends in the West tend to look at things in China in black and white terms, instead of focusing on the historical background and the cultural differences. I mean, I may sound cliche, but this is how I look at their perceptions.
Yeah, I remember when I was studying human rights in Sweden some almost 20 years ago. In the beginning, I really had a very hard feeling studying human rights. There's many things we discussed in the class I would not agree with our professors, but it took me some years to digest what they taught. So we sometimes had a very heated discussion in the class. But gradually I understand some of their points were actually very positive, would be good for Chinese development. So this matter of understanding and knowledge about improving human rights does not come very easily. Even for those people who were fortunate enough to receive higher education at home and abroad, it was also a difficult process for us. So for China as a whole, I think it's even more difficult.
Have you ever tried to let and encourage your overseas friends to accept this? There's a structural conflict and contradiction between efficiency and social justice. If you want to get things done quickly, you have to exercise a kind of a very strong political will, and that means the liberty, individual liberty and the rights of individuals might be compromised, because you have to promote the economic development of the whole society, to take a holistic view about what means to have a well-being for this country that went through years of humiliation, internal and external alike, chaotic things. So
yeah, I see for developing country like us, we are a big populated country. For a long time, actually, we have our different priorities. In 1980s, the focus is on economic growth. And gradually, our development is becoming comprehensive development. So today we try to see scientific development. It could accommodating more things, more goals, including social justice. So earlier it's even more difficult for the government to balance, to deal with the challenges. But today now the conditions are much better than before. So with the rapid growth of the economy, our social development also gain a lot of progress.
You'll go back to political sloganeering before the 18th National Congress of the CPC, because it's Mr. Hu Jintao who said more about scientific development. Today, we keep talking about being confident on political system, being confident about the political road, being confident about the political theory. So that may, I don't know how to explain to our friends in the West why the Chinese are confident. Of course we are confident. Otherwise, why should we become the biggest trading power and the second biggest economy within such a short period of 3 decades, or even less than that? So,
in my opinion, it's about a big change of the way we look at the development in our society. This morning when we were in the Great Hall witnessing the summing up meeting of the National Human Rights Action Plan, I remember Mr. Jiang Jianguo was talking about the China dream is a human rights dream. So it's a very different approach to development. As Professor Liu Haowen mentioned, all the development in the past were only based on economic development and the social development, but without a core value. Now we talk about China dream, a human rights dream, is everything should be based on the human rights value. It's a very different change. Our
this I believe what we have discussed is a very enlightening process of educating ourselves and perhaps enlightening some of the viewers here who watch our program. Now, the last issue I want to discuss with you guys is the death penalty. Amnesty International said on one occasion that they are happy about the improvement of China's human rights. For example, the Supreme People's Court agreed to review the death penalty. And also, China seems to have developed a broader tolerance about gay rights or lesbian rights. About the death penalty, the latest National Human Rights Action Plan says categories for the application of the death penalty has dropped from 55 to 46. And we have abolished re-education through labor. Now that's coercive re-education. What do you think of such improvements, and how important are these measures?
Yeah, it's a typical controversial issues in China, and so for the death penalty issue, I say the Supreme Court and strengthened the procedural control, try to reduce the application of the punishment. So that's conducive to guarantee of the right to life. So it's the right direction. And meanwhile, I say the awareness of the society should be paid attention to, and we need all of the people come to a kind of common understanding of it.
Very quickly, your understanding.
Yeah, I think it's all those experiences coming also not only from China but also from overseas. We learn from other countries through bilateral human rights dialogue or through our UN reporting system, that Chinese officials, Chinese people learned the human rights values through different channels. I think in this respect, we also should thank the international community for help of China in the field of human rights.
As the world is becoming more flat, according to Thomas Friedman, one of the most famous economists in the United States, do you think the internet, the use of a mobile phone, will help promote understanding about the importance of human rights? Yes or no?
Yeah, difficult to answer simply. So internet play a very important role for human rights. Some persons say access to internet itself is kind of human rights. Meanwhile, use of internet could be a threat to some rights.
I believe it can play a very important role.
And thank you very much for your participation in this very meaningful discussion about human rights. Of course, we have problems and challenges. I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.